They thought no one would notice while the Joe Biden was unconscious, and the country distracted a signature machine buried deep in the White House. F kept working, issuing pardons, passing orders, and protecting names that were never supposed to be touched. But when Cash Patel stepped into that hearing room, everything changed. What started as a quiet oversight meeting turned into a full-blown unraveling of power lies, and one woman's secret grip on the executive branch. And when he named Hillary Clinton, the room went silent. By the time the final file was revealed, what they tried to bury was already burning across every screen in America. Stay locked in, because what you're about to hear wasn't just hidden, it was designed to stay hidden. So before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss this moment they never wanted you to hear. It didn't begin with a bang. There were no flashing cameras, no sirens, no breaking news banner running across the screen, just another routine oversight hearing, on paper at least. But inside the room, something was off. Cash Patel walked in holding a manila folder that was too thick to warn to, dangerous to ignore. He didn't smile, he didn't greet anyone. He just sat down, placed the file on the desk, and waited to be called. The chairman cleared his throat, expecting another slow morning of bureaucratic back and forth. Instead, Patel opened the folder, looked straight ahead, and dropped the match over. 8,000 clemencies and executive orders were issued while President Biden was medically unfit to serve. A pause, just long enough for people to wonder if they heard him correctly, and none of them were signed by him, not a single one. Now, the silence shifted. Not confusion, not disbelief, something colder. A senator raised an eyebrow. Are you implying someone else authorized them? Patel nodded once. I'm not implying it, I'm stating it. The orders were signed using an autopen device remotely activated from Jill Biden's personal residence. Gasps didn't come often in hearings like this, but they came now. Another lawmaker leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. You're saying the First Lady authorized executive actions on behalf of the president without constitutional authority? That's exactly what I'm saying, Patel answered. And I have digital logs, security footage, and classified memos to prove it. The chairman tried to cut in. Let's slow this down. Are you saying this was done behind the president's back? Patel didn't blink. I'm saying the president was not capable of making decisions. Medically, cognitively, physically, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coordinated operation to bypass the constitutional chain of command. The room began to shift. Members looked at each other, some scribbled notes, others simply froze. Then came the hammer. There's a list of people who received clemency under these orders, Patel continued. One of them is Hillary Clinton. The room fell into a differential of silence. Every camera turned. Every reporter sat up. Clinton's pardon wasn't routine, Patel said. It was strategic, calculated, and it protected her from a looming indictment that never saw daylight because someone in power made sure it didn't. And just like that, what was supposed to be a sleepy committee hearing turned into the beginning of a national scandal. Before we go any further, remember this: the most damning details are still sealed in Patel's file. What's been said so far is only the surface, the fingerprints, the timestamps, the secret logs. They don't just implicate Joe Biden. They raise a far more dangerous question. Who else knew? The following morning, every major outlet was scrambling. Some tried to spin it. Others tried to ignore it, but the footage was already out. The image of Cash Patel holding up a White House memo, time-stamped, location tagged, and signed with a digital signature traced back to a home Wi-Fi router registered to Jill Biden. CNN called it unverified. Fox called it explosive. But behind closed doors, the White House was in damage control mode. Inside a secure briefing room, staffers debated whether to issue a statement, but no one could agree on what the statement should be because no one knew or claimed to know who actually signed the orders, not even the president. He's not entirely clear on what we're talking about, whispered one aide. He doesn't remember the week those pardons were processed. The chief of staff looked at the floor. We need to find out who accessed the autopen system. They didn't need to look far at the logs. Showed multiple activations of the system, all traced to a single device, a laptop connected via Jill Biden's network. Worse yet, the system had been accessed repeatedly during the exact period when President Biden was reportedly under private medical supervision at the Naval Observatory. But it wasn't just the location. Each session was authenticated by a fingerprint scan. Jill Biden's Patel Returned to the committee the next day with more, he carried a tablet now loaded with digital evidence. Metadata routing paths, security overrides. He held it up as the room fell silent once again. This is not speculation. These signatures were not forged. They were made legally. The autopen carries the same weight as the president's hand, but the authority to use it is not transferable. A lawmaker interrupted. Then how did she get access? Patel raised an eyebrow. That's the question you should all be asking, because it wasn't just access, it was intent. The document showed that someone had overridden the White House protocol chain. The chief counsel had been left off. The email loop, the pardon review board, had been bypassed entirely. In fact, not a single formal review of Hillary Clinton's file had taken place. This wasn't. It's just someone helping out while the president recovered, Patel said. This was a power grab, quiet, precise, and shielded under the guise of spousal privilege. Room buzzed with whispers. One representative leaned in. You're saying Jill Biden acted as an unelected president? Patel's answer was cold. I'm saying we were governed by someone who never stood for a single vote. The committee went silent outside. Protesters began to gather. Some waved flags. Others held signs with one question: who's really been running the country? By the third day of the hearing, the political temperature had risen. Jill Biden had not responded publicly. The White House press secretary dodged every question with the same line: we are confident in the integrity of all executive processes. But no one was buying it. Not anymore inside the committee chamber. A new exhibit had been added to the hearing's evidence table, a sealed folder marked Clinton Executive Clemency File. It was thinner than expected. Too thin. Patel picked it up and held it toward the committee. This is all there is, he said. No legal review, no correspondence from the Justice Department, no national security consultation. Just a single document signed with an autopen granting a full pardon to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Gasps followed, not from the content, but from what was missing. A senior committee member, experienced and typically calm, narrowed his eyes. Are we to believe this was done in isolation? Patel placed the folder back down. It wasn't in isolation, it was in secret, according to forensic logs. A pardon was authorized at 2:41 a.m. on a Saturday, a time when most government systems were idle. Surveillance footage from the residence showed Jill Biden in her study at the exact minute of the remote activation. Everything about this pardon, Patel explained, was designed to evade scrutiny. The timing, the lack of documentation, the absence of staff oversight. It wasn't just a pardon, it was a shield. Several members murmured in disbelief. One asked bluntly, what was she shielding Clinton from? Oh. Patel didn't hesitate. A sealed indictment. The room tensed. He continued. The Department of Justice had at that time opened an investigation into improper handling of foreign donations during Clinton's tenure at the State Department. The case was progressing quietly, likely heading toward a grand jury. The pardon ended all of that. It made prosecution legally impossible. The implications were clear. One committee member leaned back stunned, so the First Lady intervened in a criminal case involving a former Secretary of State. No, Patel corrected. She prevented one from happening outside the chamber. The media frenzy reached new heights. Reporters speculated, commentators screamed across split screens. Former DOJ officials debated the legality of Joe Biden's actions and Hillary Clinton. She remained silent. No tweet, no interview, no denial. Some took that silence as strategy, others took it as guilt. But inside the hearing, Patel's message was direct. The Constitution doesn't allow for proxy presidencies. There is no spousal override. In Article 2, he paused, then added with gravity, if this pardon stands, then precedent has been set not by Congress, not by the... Again, while the committee sharpened its focus on Jill Biden, another name was rising back into the spotlight, and this time no one could ignore it. Hillary Clinton, though she had remained silent. Her legal team had not. A statement was released the night before, calling the allegations an outrageous political stunt built on conspiracy theories and distorted timelines. But the statement lacked one critical element: a denial of the pardon. Inside the chamber, Patel addressed it head-on. I want to remind this committee, Hillary Clinton has not denied receiving the pardon. She has not challenged the legitimacy of the autopen document. That silence speaks volumes. A lawmaker interjected. Could she have refused the pardon if it was improperly granted? Patel nodded. Yes, any recipient of a pardon can reject it, but to do that, she would have to acknowledge it was offered. So far, she's chosen not to say a word. That's when Patel did something unexpected. He asked for a closed session, the chairman. Agreed for the next 45 minutes, all cameras were turned off. Reporters were ushered out. Only senior members, attorneys, and national security staff remained. When the doors reopened, every face inside looked different, more serious, more stunned. The chairman's voice was tight. Mr. Patel has presented classified documentation confirming the existence of an investigative file, one that includes Hillary Clinton and foreign nationals tied to a known influence network. No one said a word, Patel clarified. This file was flagged for indictment review before being marked inactive following the pardon. That inactive status was triggered by a digita notice issued within 30 minutes of Jill Biden's executive action. In other words, the pardon wasn't just a bureaucratic error. It directly stopped a federal criminal case. And behind that case were names tied to foreign donors' offshore accounts and at least to foreign governments. A senior lawmaker finally said what no one wanted to say out loud: "This is obstruction." Patel didn't reply. He didn't have to. The screen behind him lit up again, showing a final detail, a file note from the lead DOJ investigator dated 1 day before the pardon was signed. Anticipate political interference contingency. Protocol in place. Do you know what that contingency was? A congressman asked. Patel nodded yes. If this committee is ready, I'll show you. Is it damning? Someone asked from the back. Patel's voice didn't waver. It's not just damning. It proves the entire pardon was part of a legal firewall, one designed not to protect Hillary Clinton's reputation, but to block a chain of accountability that would have stretched across agencies. He paused, and maybe across administrations by now. The committee hearings were no longer just legislative proceedings. They had become national theater. Millions tuned in daily. Streaming platforms carried Patel's testimony. Live headlines screamed with phrases like "Pardon scandal explodes" and "Jill Biden's quiet coup." But behind the stage, in the closed-door briefings and midnight emails, something more troubling. Wasn't Patel returned to the stand with a single objective: to expose the chain of silence that let the scheme happen. He placed a printout on the table, a White House visitor logged, then another, a phone transcript from an internal review, piece by piece. He laid out how officials within the Department of Justice, the Office of Legal Counsel, and even the National Security Council were informed, and said nothing. These aren't accomplices in the traditional sense. Patel explained. They didn't plan it, but they knew. They watched, and they did nothing, he called it. Institutional paralysis. Patel pointed to a specific date, February 9th, that morning. A legal aide in the Justice Department sent an internal warning: there's a procedural irregularity in the Clinton file. Shouldn't this go through the usual channels? The response: it's been handled. Do not escalate. Another message came from a communications advisor in the West Wing. FL has authority under ECHO protocol. Back off, FL. First Lady in ECHO protocol. It was never intended for executive orders. It was a communications fallback, a technical fail-safe. In case the president was physically unreachable during a national crisis, ECHO protocol was designed for a nuclear scenario, Patel said. Not for political favors, a senator interrupted. So people knew the system was being abused. Yes, Patel replied. And they covered it up, some out of loyalty, others out of fear, but all of them contributed to a wall of silence that made this possible. He pulled up a chart, a timeline of internal alerts. 8 separate warnings, 5 flagged reviews, 3 denied escalations, and every one of them stopped cold. The room simmered. One representative leaned in. What? About the intelligence community? Did they say anything? Patel hesitated. There was a brief filed by an analyst at ODNI. It referenced unusual executive routing. The report was flagged for follow-up but was withdrawn the next morning. The chairman asked quietly by whom. Patel answered without pause: an acting official later appointed by President Biden. No one spoke. No one had to. The implication was obvious. The firewall extended beyond the White House. It had moved through departments, past watchdogs, and around every constitutional barrier meant to stop it. One lawmaker whispered, "The deeper this goes, the less it looks like a single rogue act." Patel agreed. It wasn't rogue. He said it was coordinated silence. And now that silence was crumbling document by document, name by name. But one final link still remained, and it hadn't yet been exposed. By this point, the hearing chamber had changed. No more smirks, no more political posturing. Everyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent, now realized they were standing on the edge of something unprecedented. Cash Patel entered with a different kind of document. This time, not a log, not a chat transcript, not a visitor entry, but a medical file. This, he said quietly, is the trigger. He handed it to the committee clerk, who placed it on the main screen, redacted in parts but clear in meaning. Presidential cognitive assessment. January 18th, the result: unfit for executive function recommendation, temporary transfer of authority. Gasps. The doctor's note went further: sedation required for stabilization, recommend. Invoking Section 3 of the 25th Amendment if symptoms persist beyond 72 hours. That never happened. Instead, executive authority was redirected unofficially to be clear. Patel said the president was declared medically unfit by his own attending physician. And yet no official power transfer occurred. Who suppressed it? Someone asked from the DIS. Patel clicked to the next screen. Directive hold issued by senior advisor, spousal liaison, informed no action to be taken. The committee stared. A spousal liaison. The First Lady had been informed she had received the diagnosis, and instead of alerting the cabinet or invoking the 25th Amendment, she waited and then used the moment to authorize a series of executive actions under his name. A congresswoman spoke, her voice cold. That was the moment it became illegal. Patel nodded. Yes, that's the moment power was knowingly exercised without authority. Everything that followed, the orders, the clemencies, the pardon, was built on that silence. He displayed one final document, a direct email from Joe Biden to a senior aide. He's resting. Let me handle the weekend memos. I know what he would want there. It was proof of intent, not confusion, not urgency, not fear, but control. Calculated, assumed, executed. The room fell into stunned quiet. Then the chairman cleared his throat. We have heard enough at this time. I am issuing a formal referral to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation into Jill Biden's actions during the incapacitation period of the former president. Gasps. Applause. Protest, shouting. Some called it political revenge. Others called it overdue justice. But Patel said nothing. He simply packed up his files, nodded once, and left the room behind him. A nation held its breath because only one chapter remained, and it would determine whether any of this, the pardons, the cover-ups, the quiet seizure of power, would be undone, or whether history would pretend it never happened at all. The storm that followed the hearings was unlike anything Washington had seen in decades. Within 24 hours of the criminal referral, the Department of Justice announced it would open a preliminary investigation into Joe Biden's use of executive authority. Media outlets scrambled for exclusive statements. Editorials were written. Leaked memos hit social media, and the public split down the middle, some defending the First Lady as a caretaker, others branding her a constitutional saboteur. But behind the headlines, one quiet decision would shape the outcome. A federal judge in D.C., reviewing the legality of the Hillary Clinton pardon, issued a brief but powerful opinion. No individual, elected or unelected, holds the authority to bypass constitutional procedures for personal or political reasons. This includes the issuance of clemency. The pardon of Hillary Rodham Clinton is therefore rendered invalid and vacated as a matter courts, but by the spouse of a president who could no longer function. That's not democracy. That's monarchy with better branding. The room didn't clap, it just stared, because everyone in that chamber knew this wasn't just about who signed the paper. It was about who got away with it. The next hearing day was standing room only. Extra chairs were rolled in. Reporters sat shoulder to. The air smelled like sweat, paper, and fear. What started as a procedural oversight session had now morphed into a constitutional crisis, and it was about to go deeper. Cash Patel stepped up again. No notes this time, just a flash drive in his hand. This contains internal security reports from the executive office of the president. He announced these documents were never meant to leave the West Wing. He handed it to the committee clerk, who loaded the contents onto TH screen. The first file opened to a series of emails marked urgent bypass authorization protocol, all of them dated during the same stretch when President Biden was reportedly undergoing routine evaluations, but the content told a different story. This was no routine checkup. Patel said it was a full medical incapacitation. The president was unable to speak coherently. He was sedated for extended periods, and yet during this exact window, 58 executive orders were issued. 58, one lawmaker repeated in disbelief. Patel nodded. All signed by autopen, all logged through a device linked to Joe Biden's network. Some were domestic policy adjustments. Others impacted foreign relations. But the most disturbing one was Directive 96. The screen changed a short memo. Appeared flagged as classified. This directive granted discretionary access to White House communication tools to an individual listed as family advisor non-government. That individual was Jill Biden. There were audible gasps in the chamber. You're telling us she had direct access to national communications? Yes, Patel replied. Encrypted briefings, decision memos, even draft orders. For nearly 12 days, she functioned as an unchecked executive authority. A congresswoman leaned forward. Why didn't anyone stop? Patel looked grim because no one knew she used secure back channels, originally created for emergency continuity of government. Protocols they were meant to be used in the event of nuclear war, not political convenience. The chamber fell into heavy silence, and then came the video security footage from the residence enhanced for clarity. Timestamp 3:02 a.m. It showed Jill Biden seated alone, a laptop in front of her, her hand moving the trackpad. On screen was the autopen software. With one click, a green bar appeared. Order authorized. She stared at it, no hesitation, no emotion. Then she closed the laptop and turned off the Patel looked up from the screen. This was not a one-time decision. It was a system hidden in plain sight, built under our noses, used without permission. And no one stopped it, because no one imagined it. At the back of the room, a man in a dark suit stood up and walked out. Nobody followed him, but everyone noticed the fifth day opened with tension thick enough to touch protesters. Outside the Capitol, now outnumbered the press, some carried signs showing Joe Biden behind bars. Others carried photos of Hillary Clinton with one word stamped across, pardoned. Inside the committee chambers had grown colder, not because of the temperature, but because of what was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a blueprint. Cash Patel took his seat calmly, but the folder in his hands was anything but ordinary. It bore no markings, just two words written in red ink: back channel comms. What I'm about to show you, Patel began, is not public. It wasn't subpoenaed, it wasn't leaked. It was handed to me anonymously 3 weeks ago. And it confirms everything we've suspected. He held up a stack of printed emails and encrypted chat logs, redacted in places but clear in their intent. Names were missing, roles were not. The First Lady was not acting alone. He continued. There was a support network, staffers, legal consultants, a former tech contractor who previously worked on the Obama transition team. The screen behind him came alive with the first email. Ensure the president is resting. Push Order 37 through her channel. Use protocol Echo Black if questioned. Another email followed seconds later. She knows what to do. He doesn't need to be in the loop right now. A wave of murmurs spread across the committee table. These weren't just assistants helping with routine paperwork. They were moving federal decisions, like chess pieces, through someone unelected, unvetted, and unaccountable, a lawmaker. Finally spoke. Are you saying a shadow staff operating outside constitutional review was running parts of the executive branch? Patel nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying, and it gets worse. He clicked forward. Here's a direct message between two staffers on an encrypted app, timestamped the same hour Hillary Clinton's pardon went through. It's done. The shield is in place. No indictment now. Not ever. Stunned silence. A second later, a congressman whispered under his breath, "This is a cover-up." Patel didn't respond to that. Instead, he closed the folder. The term First Lady is ceremonial. The role is no authority, no clearance, no constitutional function, and yet during this critical window, Joe Biden was reading classified memos, issuing executive orders, and interfering with pending federal investigations. A committee member clenched his jaw. How far up does this go? Patel gave a chilling answer. There's no ceiling when no one's watching the door. The room was silent again. Then a clerk entered quietly and handed a note to the chairman. He read it, frowned, and looked up. Jill Biden has declined to testify. Her legal team claims executive privilege. Several members erupted at once. She's not the executive. She's never held office. She's dodging under a title that doesn't belong to her, but the chairman slammed the gal once and brought order back. The message was clear. Gil Biden wouldn't come willingly, and yet the evidence kept coming. The committee chamber was buzzing before the hearing even started. Phones rang non-stop. Legal teams whispered in corners. Overnight, the phrase executive privilege had exploded across news outlets like a fire set in dry brush. But now lawmakers wanted to know, can a first lady claim protection meant for the president? Cash Patel walked in with something different this time. Not a folder, not a flash drive, but a printed copy of a legal opinion. This is a 2011 DOJ memo, he began. It clearly states that executive privilege is not automatically extended to family members even if they reside in the White House. He paused to let the words land. There is no precedent, no legal framework, and no justification that allows Jill Biden to hide behind a privilege she does not possess. The chairman looked over his glasses. Has the White House responded directly? They haven't, Patel replied. But her attorneys have their letter claims that because she was acting in proximity to executive decision-making, she qualifies for protection. A congresswoman scoffed. Proximity isn't power exactly, Patel said. Proximity doesn't grant you a nuclear code, and it sure as hell doesn't give you the authority to pardon Hillary Clinton. He placed the memo in front of the committee. Every legal scholar I've consulted agrees. If the First Lady acted without delegated authority, then her actions are not protected. They are criminal. One representative leaned in. What about the autopen system itself? How is it accessed without flags? Smiled for the first time. I am glad you asked. He tapped on the table, and a technician pulled up a flowchart, lines and boxes, names and devices, and at the center, user, IDLJ2, 202. For that was the login used to override the standard security protocol. It bypassed cabinet sign-off, it redirected clearance pathways, and it gave one user the ability to issue orders unilaterally. Was it a White House credential? No. Patel said it was created from a private device registered under the name Jill to Biden. A low rumble filled the room. Some members shook their heads, others leaned back, stunned. Every single command issued under this profile was logged, and every single one happened during a period in which the president's medical evaluations classified him as non-communicative and under sedation. A long silence followed. Then the chairman spoke. What happens now? Patel replied without hesitation. The pardon for Hillary Clinton is invalid. Every order issued under that ID is now legally suspect. And Jill Biden, he looked around the room, will need to face criminal referral. The room erupted. Some clapped, others shouted in disbelief. The camera crews captured every reaction, but Patel remained still, because this wasn't the end. It was only the start of a legal firestorm that would test the limits of presidential power and redefine what a first lady could never be allowed to do. Of law, just like that, Clinton's legal shield was stripped away. Reporters surrounded her New York estate. Microphones waited, cameras rolled. She gave no statement. Her legal team filed an emergency appeal. It was denied within 2 hours back in Congress. The committee issued its final report, 300 pages long. It detailed a pattern of unauthorized access, systemic failure, and institutional silence. But the conclusion was blunt. Jill Biden engaged in acts that constituted the unauthorized exercise of executive power, including, but not limited to, the granting of federal pardons, the issuance of executive orders, and the suppression of a constitutionally mandated transfer of authority. Motion was introduced to bar from holding any federal advisory or a ceremonial role in the future. It passed. Protesters, who once screamed outside the Capitol, now marched in quiet resolve. Signs read, "No more silent presidencies," and "Democracy doesn't wear a wedding ring." But the biggest shift wasn't legislative, it was structural. Congress passed the Presidential Clarity Act, requiring mandatory public notification. When the president is declared unfit for executive function, a new oversight panel was created to monitor autopen usage. All spousal access to secured systems was permanently revoked in a single month. The role of the First Lady had gone from ceremonial to central, and then just as quickly dismantled from the inside out. As for Cash Patel, he gave one interview, only one. The reporter asked him, "Why did you take this on? You knew how messy it would get." Patel looked down for a moment, then simply said, "Because someone pressed the button who was never supposed to hold it." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because the country knew the autopen had been activated, the system had been hijacked. The law had been twisted into a tool of protection, not for the people, but for power. And now, with the pardon reversed and the investigation underway, the question that remained wasn't whether it happened, it was how close we came to never finding out at all.